Okay, let's just think about this for a second. What happens when the medicine you trust, the very thing you give your child to make them feel better, turns out to be poison? It's a nightmare scenario, right? Well, today we're going to unpack the absolutely devastating story of how a simple cough syrup became a deadly weapon for hundreds of children. And in doing so, it just blew the lid off a deeply, deeply flawed global drug system. Just let those words sink in. You realize you gave him poison. That's from a father named Ibrahima Sanya. His son Lamin was just 3 years old. He was one of the victims. And, his words really frame this entire tragedy for us. This isn't just about bad medicine. It's about a complete and total breach of trust on a global scale. All right, so let's dive into the story. It all starts in the Gambia, a small country in West Africa. And for dozens and dozens of families, what happened next was, well, it was the worst thing you can possibly imagine. So back in the summer of 2022, doctors in the Gambia started noticing something terrifying. All of these young kids, all under 5, were suddenly dying from acute kidney failure. It was a complete mystery. Now, the doctors on the ground, they had a hunch. They suspected it was linked to 4 specific cough syrups made in India. But getting proof? That took months, and in that time, while everyone was trying to figure this out, at least 70 children died. So the big question is, what on earth was in that syrup? How does a simple remedy become a lethal poison? Well, the answer is horrifyingly simple. It was a toxic, illegal swap, and it was all about money. Right. When the World Health Organization finally tested the syrups, they found what they called unacceptable amounts of 2 chemicals, diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol. Let me be super clear. These things do not belong in medicine. They're industrial solvents. In fact, this is the main stuff you find in antifreeze for your car. It's incredibly toxic for humans, and it just wrecks your kidneys. And this right here, this is the why. It's so simple and so brutal. The ingredient they should have used is pharmaceutical-grade glycerine. It's totally safe, it's a solvent, and it has a sweet taste. Now, look at the industrial solvents, DEG and EG. They're also sweet tasting, but, and this is the key, they are way cheaper. So let's be real, this was no accident. This was someone deciding to cut costs, swapping out a safe ingredient for a cheap poison. They literally traded children's lives to save a few bucks. Now, you might be thinking this was some horrible, one-off freak accident, but it wasn't. Not even close. This was the completely predictable outcome of a regulatory system that has been failing and failing badly for decades, both inside India and, as we now see, abroad. Yeah, just look at this timeline. The Gambia wasn't the first time this happened. It's part of a horrifying pattern. 1972 in Madras, 15 kids die. 1986 in Mumbai, 14 patients. 1998, Gurgaon, 33 children. 2019, Jammu, another 12 children. All of these happened inside India from the very same contaminant. It was a recurring nightmare that in 2022, they finally exported to the rest of the world. So you have to ask, how does this keep happening? Well, the system is just broken. First off, you've got this fragmented authority where national and state regulators are stepping on each other's toes, so enforcement is a mess. Then the penalties. They're a joke. There's a 2023 law that basically lets manufacturers pay a small fine instead of going to jail for this stuff. And on top of all that, there's zero transparency. We can't see inspection data, we don't know who gets prosecuted, and then you hear about alleged corruption, like an official supposedly taking a bribe to swap out contaminated samples. I mean, come on, it's a recipe for disaster. Okay, so you've got this pattern of failure inside the country, but that reveals something even more disturbing when you look globally. It shows a global health system that basically has 2 sets of rules, one for rich countries and a completely different one for everyone else. Just look at the difference here. It's night and day. If a company in India wants to export drugs to, say, the US or Europe, you better believe the FDA is sending its own inspectors to that factory. They're checking everything. But when they export to poorer nations like the Gambia, they don't have their own FDA to send. They are forced to just trust the Indian regulators. The very same system we just saw has failed its own people over and over again. And this is the really crucial point. A country like the Gambia, they don't have their own labs to test every batch of medicine coming in. They have no choice but to take the paperwork from India at face value. And the World Health Organization, they can sound the alarm, but that's always after people have already gotten sick or died. It's a reactive system, not a preventative one. It leaves the world's most vulnerable people completely defenseless.
So after all this tragedy, what happens next? What about accountability? Well, as you might guess, the fight for justice has had wildly different outcomes, and it really shines a light on that same global inequality we've been talking about.
So, what's the value of a child's life? According to the initial offer from the Gambian government, it's $285. You can imagine many of the grieving families turned it down flat. They didn't want a payout. They wanted justice. Okay, now contrast that number with this one. A similar thing happened in Uzbekistan. 68 kids died from toxic syrup, also from India. But there, a court sentenced an Indian executive involved in the distribution to 20 years in prison. 20 years. So, real accountability? It's absolutely possible. And yet, back in India, for the children who died in the Gambia, nothing. The company, Maiden Pharmaceuticals, had its license suspended for a bit, but the executives, no legal action whatsoever for making the poison that killed those kids. The company still denies they did anything wrong, and believe it or not, the Indian government actually pushed back, accusing the WHO of jumping to conclusions. It's just unbelievable. So we're going to end where we started, with a question from that father, Abrima Sanya. It's an incredibly uncomfortable question, but it's one we have to ask. If these were American or European children, would the system be different? And when you look at that two-tiered inspection system we just talked about, well, the answer seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? And that really cuts to the very heart of this entire crisis. It's a question we should all be thinking about.